Hey guys, so I want to apologize for the first part of this series that started yesterday. Believe it or not, yesterday I was super sleep deprived. I was going on to I was operating in maybe 3 to 4 hours of sleep. I'm working out this new schedule for a test. Now that I'm done with school, I'm trying to get into law school at the moment, and I've been studying for the LSAT, and I find that I study more effectively at night, funnily enough. So, because during the day I get more lazy, and I kind of get, I try studying during the day, and then suddenly I get sleepy. So I find at night is when I have most energy. I'm kind of like a night owl. I stay up, usually normally around 1 to 2 a.m. So I decided to put it into switch my studying at night, since that's when I have my most energy. And yeah, I was still kind of new to it when I recorded part 1, so if part 1 I said a lot of things and just kind of rambled and looked like I was on the verge of napping, it's because I still hadn't fully adapted to this new schedule. But I've got the hang of it now and I'm good. So yeah, I just wanted to apologize for part 1 of this series if I seemed more off than usual. So, yeah, either way, we're back to the First Crusade by Kings and Generals, and today we're going to be learning about the rise of Alexios Komnenos, who is the emperor during the time of the First Crusade, and who was actually just quite a great emperor for the Byzantines. I actually liked his diplomacy and his maneuvering through all the egos, through the first Crusader Christian kings, and helping try to get the Romans back while also having to manage all this. The guy really I think was great in terms of politics and diplomacy and trying to handle that. If he's the same guy I remember from the Extra History series, that is. So yeah, either way, I'm going to be looking forward to seeing about his rise today. So without any further ado, let's get to it, my friends. Let's learn about the rise of Alexios Komnenos, part 2 of Kings and Generals, the First Crusade series.
Romanos' stepson, Michael VII, now sat on the throne, but behind the scene, various noble families were competing for power and titles as the state crumbled.
Disney Plus, Hulu, and
The young emperor would eventually earn the nickname Paripinekis, or minus a quarter, for the debasement of the currency, solidus, which now contained only 58% gold, with the remainder being made up of silver and copper. This meant that the buying power of the currency dropped, which in turn crippled the economy, and when Michael raised taxes, there was an immediate response from the Balkans. In general, the sources claim that the 21-year-old emperor was a mere puppet, ruled by different courtiers at different periods, and was only interested in hunting and feasts. Bulgarian rebels, supported by Serbia, raised a pretender, Constantine Budin, in 1072, who took Skopje and defeated the strategos of the Bulgarian theme. Nish and Ohrid quickly fell before the empire could organize a response. The rebels were crushed at Castoria, but it would take time until 1073 until the remnants were dealt with. Not only did this cost the empire crucial time, but it meant that they couldn't launch a full-scale counterattack to the east, as a large portion of its professional army, or Takhmeta, was busy in the Balkans. The compromise was to send a smaller force under the command of Isaac Komnenos, along with his younger brother, Alexios, leading a tenth of what Romanos gathered 2 years earlier. Accompanying them was a cavalry force of 400 Frankish mercenaries headed by the Norman Roussel de Bayeux, who was present at Manzikert. By this point, the Seljuks had already broken the eastern defences and roamed the Anatolian plateau unopposed, but the coastline was secure, as well as any city with stone walls, so the region was far from being lost, and this expeditionary force was crucial in asserting dominance over the nomads. The imperial army assembled in the area of Caesarea, where a serious incident drove a wedge between the Byzantines and their mercenaries. After Isaac punished a Frankish soldier, the insulted Norman leader took his men and fled during the night. Upon hearing this news, the Byzantine commander considered sending Alexios to track them down, but that was when he was informed that a Seljuk force was approaching their position. The two armies met near Cappadocia, and after a failed ambush, Isaac was wounded and captured, while Alexios barely escaped. Some of the fleeing soldiers were rejected from the nearby cities, who were afraid the Seljuks were close behind. Meanwhile, Roussel managed to defeat a different group of nomads and seize the town of Ankara, where he proclaimed himself a prince and founded his own state. The news shocked the emperor, who—
My goodness. Yeah, a complete mess, right? Yeah, that's hilarious. The dude really just founded his own little area right here. Like again, I do know of Alexios's, reign as emperor, but that was more of his political maneuvering. I don't know anything about him as if he was like a commander or like a leader in terms of a militaristic sense. But yeah, either way, that kind of like, that's the thing. I know like later Romans often used outside forces such as mercenaries and stuff, but yeah, that's kind of the thing with it. I was recommended to me a series about the Norman conquest of Italy. I believe they also had a part in facing the Byzantines, and especially when they had holdings in Italy still. So, it is interesting. I think we will be covering that in the future. I'm looking forward to seeing, you know, a bit more of this dynamic between the Normans and the Romans.
responded by sending his uncle, John Ducas, with a considerable force to deal with the adventurer. Of the 12,000-strong army, many were fresh recruits, with some veterans from Manzikert, as well as 1,500 Varangians and 500 Franks. Once Roussel learned that the army crossed the Bosphorus, he gathered his own 3,000 men, most of whom were knights.
Okay. For a second there, when I saw the number 3,000, I was like, oh man, that's quite the number difference. But I will say though, these are knights. And the thing is about knights, as we've seen in the past, even when they lose, they're able to inflict heavy damage. And I think that's just due to the training. Obviously the equipment that the medieval knight has is just OP. They're very well equipped, but also very well trained, because medieval knights basically trained from like childhood to in the art of war, if I'm thinking about the correct medieval knight, you know? And incredibly skilled combatants, so they can always inflict heavy damage, even when they're losing, like in the Ottoman Empire series. Even when they were on the losing side, they were always noted to inflict heavy casualties. So again, like, he may not have the quantity, but he definitely has quality if these are well-trained knights. Meanwhile, the Byzantines only have a lot of fresh recruits, which means that their morale and training and experience is certainly not up to par, especially compared to a knight. So really, I think the Romans are gonna have to use some type of strategy here, because a straight-up fight would seem to favor the knight. So I'm wondering if he has a trick or two up his sleeve. I don't know, I guess we'll see.
The two armies met on the 10th of May 1074 on the bridge of the Sangarios River, not far from Amorium, which was the Norman power base. The Romans offered amnesty to the adventurer, but their offer was rejected. That is when, rather than waiting for reinforcements from the nearby cities, the inexperienced John Ducas ordered his men to—
Okay, the fact that he just said the inexperienced, that tells me that he's about to make a mistake. I don't know, usually when Kings and Generals kind of highlights a character trait of a commander, like inexperience or stuff like that, usually it's a foretelling of things not going well. But I guess we'll see again. Anything could happen. That's kind of what I like about history, but I don't know, man.
to charge across the river. The Byzantines were now in a very precarious position, with the river at their back and the Norman army in front.
Yeah, that's the thing. I've said this before. I don't know how deep this river is, if it's like that easily traversable. But ideally, I've always said you don't want to fight with a body of water behind your back, because if you're pushed back or you need a retreat, then you have this, and usually we hear plenty of times of soldiers drowning trying to get away, or like stuff like that. That's why it's never ideal to fight with water behind you. Obviously, there have been battles where an enemy has overcome that, but most of the time in this channel's history, those with a body of water behind them usually suffer drowning casualties when they're trying to get away, so I don't know. Hopefully John proves me wrong, because I'm getting the vibe he's not gonna pass. Maybe the Varangians might carry, though. The Varangians seem to be, you know, I kind of do love the Varangian Guard. I actually think they're kind of chads, so maybe they might help, but we'll find out.
The three divisions were arranged in two lines, with the right flank led by the Franks, while John held the centre with his Varangians. His son, Andronikos, was on the left, with the governor of the Anatolic theme, Nikephoros Photaniates, in charge of the rearguard, composed of the levies. In the early hours of the next day, Roussel rode towards the Frankish line and addressed the men, urging them to defect, which they did.
Again, notice how the Romans, foreign allies, are now just turning on them en masse. What the heck?
Together, the two groups pushed against the Roman centre. As the battle raged on between the most elite troops on the field, Nikephoros Photaniates panicked and ordered a retreat, taking half the army to his estates. Seeing this, many began to surrender or retreat, and before long the battle was over. John Ducas was captured alongside his son Andronikos, who now contemplated the irony as 3 years ago he was in charge of the rearguard and abandoned Romanos at Manzikert. A new army was quickly gathered under the command of his other son Constantine, but shortly after crossing to release his family, he died, and another expedition disintegrated, leading to nothing but debt. Roussel decided to make another gamble by proclaiming the captured John Ducas as the new emperor. This was the pivotal moment when desperation forced the Roman hand to choose the lesser evil. After losing his bid for the Seljuk throne...
Okay, so Romano seems raising a new... Considering how many Byzantines kind of turn on each other, the Romans have a knack for that, and proclaiming new kings, that's kind of an interesting move to help throw off political stability. And John just might take it, honestly. With the Roman track record of just declaring yourself emperor, he might just take it. I mean, it's better than just being a prisoner, so who knows. So it seems like he might call upon the Seljuks, which, it's an interesting change of events, I must say. Both Tugril and Quadalmish had a legitimate claim to the throne, as they both descended from the common ancestor Seljuk Beg, who was their grandfather.
Against Alparslan, Suleiman and his three brothers fled to the Taurus Mountains back in 1064, and he became the sole survivor after multiple punitive raids. Now that Melikshah I ruled the Seljuk Empire, which was weakening, Suleiman managed to establish himself in the region, which had the exact same climate conditions as the steppe, but was detached from the authority of Isfahan. The nomads raided, but also traded with the local Byzantines, who were themselves cut off from Constantinople, when suddenly Suleiman received an offer which would not only make him an ally of the empire, but also formalize his territorial claims and fill his pockets. All he had to do was deal with Roussel, who just sacked Chrysopolis near Constantinople. The Norman finally met his match as he fell for the classic feigned retreat and was captured by the Seljuks.
Wow. But now they essentially helped establish Suleiman as an independent, legitimate power, though. And who's to say Suleiman won't just, like, straight up be like, well, Let me take more, like, I don't know. It seems like, I don't know, there's a potential that they created another monster, the Romans, you know? In trying to deal with one, but who knows? I guess we'll see.
But before Constantinople could send their ransom, his wife showed up with a generous amount of gold, and the Seljuks released him.
Never mind.
Desperation really kicked in, and Michael used his connection to Georgia via his wife Maria to convince Tsar George II to hold the eastern frontier and capture Roussel in return for Theodosiopolis, Tau and Kars. The crucial cities and forts were handed over, but the Georgian army failed, with many joining the Norman cause.
I am surprised at how far he's getting. The Romans, man, they keep trying so hard and like everything backfires. It's kind of hilarious, dude. Oh my goodness, they keep trying to get outside help. Notice the trend this video. Every time they rely on a foreign power or like foreign ally, it usually backfires on them. But they kind of have to though, like, you know. Yo, that sucks.
All seemed lost, but the Byzantines were well aware that if this was not handled quickly, rebellions would erupt elsewhere, proclaiming John as their rightful leader. The next candidate to step up to the job was Alexios Komnenos, a 20-year-old energetic and charismatic man who was appointed commander-in-chief and sent to deal with Roussel without any significant funds or army.
So is Alexios about to use diplomacy to help solve this situation? Again, like I said, I don't know anything about him as a military commander. I just know about his shrewd political maneuverings. So I'm wondering if he's about to put that skill to the test.
Unrelenting, the young man used his cunning and appealed to the Seljuks, promising them riches if they would capture the prince. The nomads agreed, and once again accomplished their task by inviting the wanted man to a feast and betraying him. Roussel was brought to the city of Amasya, but the problem was that Alexios didn't have the funds he promised, so he turned to the local populace. Surprisingly, the locals preferred the Norman garrison and grew fond of their prince, who, unlike the Empire, protected them from Turkic raids. In order to convince them, Alexios blindfolded Roussel and announced that he was blinded and was in no condition to defend them anymore. This plan worked, and after gathering the
Again, this is why he ends up becoming a pretty great emperor. At least from what I've seen of him. I can't pretend I know all his reign, but so I'm not sure. But point is, the guy is just shrewd and cunning. And you can see that genius on display, right, with this? So, amazing.
and paying the Seljuks, Alexios returned to Constantinople victorious and locked him in a dungeon in 1076. This is a good point to shift to the other side of our narrative, as in 1076, the growing tensions between Pope Gregory VII and Holy Roman Emperor Henry IV erupted into what is now known as the investiture controversy. The boundaries between the imperial and papal authority were always blurred, but Gregory was an overly ambitious
Yeah, so this is an interesting conflict in terms of the world between politics and religion. As we know, obviously the Holy Roman Emperor and the Papal States had, you know, very much issues with one another. We've covered a few videos regarding that, such as oversimplified, what was it, the War of the Bucket, he mentions it. Also the few Christian videos we did of the schisms, yeah, this is the one where essentially Henry, you know, kind of straight up gets excommunicated by the Pope, because, you know, there was times where the emperors would try just to instill their own religious officials in a sense, you know, bishops and cardinals and whatnot, and obviously there was this power dynamic struggle between the Pope and the emperor king. And so, I believe this is the event where the Casanova, I think that's what it's called, essentially, due to the rebelling German princes and Henry's excommunication, which is just not a good thing, obviously in a very Catholic world, he essentially goes and begs forgiveness from the Pope. I believe it's documented that he showed up in sackcloth and, barefooted outside of a castle. I think it was called Casanova. I could be completely wrong, but either way, and essentially kind of shows repentance and submission to the Pope, who reverses his decision, but it kind of helped show the power of the papacy. It's overall a very interesting thing. And I know that story, especially because it's one of the oldest stories I remember. I must have heard that when I was, like, a little kid in, like, the single digits. And, it's something that has, like, stuck in my mind of a king essentially begging forgiveness from the Pope. Kind of a really powerful image, too.
And influential pope who reformed the church, enforcing celibacy for the clergy, and preached the idea of an organized papal army led by the pontiff. On one occasion he wanted to lead an expedition into Al-Andalus, on another to aid the Eastern Roman Empire in retaking their lost lands, provided they accept the primacy of the Catholic Church, before that force retook the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. While these ideas sound familiar now, back then it was unheard of for a pope to wield that much power, or even lead his own army.
That reminds me, remember the Italian Wars video we saw, and just the Pope was out there calling, for everyone to, like, jump Venice, basically genocide them, and then other times just leading an army of his own to go fight against the French. Like, that series was so wild and all over the place, but I loved it. Either way, like, that was funny. I really love that series.
Already the seed of future events was planted in a combination of the desperate Byzantine leadership asking for aid from the West and the desire for increased power for the papacy. Agents were sent throughout Europe, exaggerating reports of violent barbarians defiling and harassing innocent pilgrims, despite the fact that since the Islamic conquest of the Holy Lands, thousands of pilgrims made their way to Jerusalem. Initially, the preferred route was to go to a maritime city, chiefly Venice, and then sail for 2 weeks. But over time, the difficult naval trip was made worse by Arab pirates and became less used than the land route. One could travel to Constantinople by land or sea, then take the Roman roads, enjoying the hospitality in this medieval version of tourism, which the Normans, Seljuks, and general instability made worse. But the stars were not yet aligned for one of the most pivotal changes in history to occur. It would take a different pope and different Eastern Roman emperor for these ideas to coalesce. Back in Byzantium, the idea of handing out money to solve all of their problems was expanded upon, with the alliance with Hungary and the Normans. In fact, Robert Guiscard was paid a large amount of gold and given 40 titles to bestow upon his followers, each acting as an annual salary. But above all, his daughter was betrothed to the son of the emperor. The idea behind this expensive endeavor was to ensure nominal control over southern Italy, as well as buy time for the state to recover. All of this money had to come from somewhere, so a reform was passed aiming to centralize the grain trade. Until this moment, farmers sold their produce to merchants, who then sold the grain to the populace at a competitive price. But in these troubled times, tax evasion was widespread. The solution was to concentrate the entire grain trade to one city, Redestos, where the price would be the same and each transaction much easier to tax. The immediate aftermath of this policy saw farmers withholding their grain in order to create a shortage, which would then raise the prices. The overcrowded city of Constantinople filled with refugees from all the lands in Anatolia now given to the Seljuk allies, began to starve, which led to an uprising. Emperor Michael managed to quell it, but the problems were just starting, as this rebellion led to civil war. Usually, civil wars involved two sides. However, in this scenario, there were 4 separate rebellions, each with its own goal. First, there was Philaretos Frachamios, who carved out a very large piece of the empire, centered around Antioch after the Battle of Manzikert. He proclaimed himself emperor and slowly expanded his realm by attacking.
How many times have we seen this? The Romans, man, they just love their civil wars. I think the Romans love fighting each other more than anything. I think it's like they're into it. I think it's like their obsession to fight each other. Holy crap. I'm telling you guys, like, it's almost funny, but it's also super sad at the same time.
Other Roman cities. Secondly, a federation of cities on the Danube River broke off and sided with the nomadic Pechenegs. In November 1077, the most powerful man in the Balkans, governor of the Dyrrhachian theme, Nikephoros Vrenios, also proclaimed himself emperor and gathered a coalition of supporters filled with veteran soldiers, as he himself was a capable commander. Lastly, we have Nikephoros Vataniates, the 76-year-old governor of the Antolikon theme, with very few supporters or credentials, who rebelled in October 1078. Vrenios took action, and after taking over much of the western territories, marched on Constantinople.
My goodness, what the heck? Literally a 4-way that Alexios and Michael have to deal with all this. My goodness, man.
Hoping the people would embrace him, but after he was rejected, he raided the suburbs. Pecheneg riders also rode south, hoping to plunder some villages, forcing the pretender to pull back. In the meantime, Vataniates was well aware that he could not take the city on his own, so he pushed the next domino in our story by hiring Seljuk mercenaries. After he took Nicaea, he stationed many of them as garrison forces in western Anatolia, including key cities like Pergamon, Ephesus, and Sardis, cities these steppe raiders could hardly take on their own, with the assumption that the moment he asked for them to leave, they would follow his command.
Wondering if that's gonna come back to bite him.
Back in Constantinople, the aristocracy knew they had to pick a side, so they chose not based on merit, but on how easy it would be to control the next ruler. The city rebelled, forcing Michael to abdicate, and Vataniates was invited to take the throne, which he did as Nikephoros III. The new emperor made a deal with the wife of Michael, Maria. She married him in exchange for the recognition of her child, Constantine Ducas, as the heir to the throne. Nikephoros III then proceeded to hand out the customary gifts and titles, but doubled down by forgiving all debt and expanding various rights to secure the rule of his new dynasty. One of those titles was that of Caesar, or second in command, which was offered to Vrenios but was rejected. Frachamios, on the other hand, agreed to accept him as emperor in return for control over his territory stretching between the key cities of Antioch, Melitene, and Edessa. However, the rebellions didn't die.
Okay, so that's an interesting turn of events. Okay, so Michael had to go. So essentially one of the pretenders just got to be the new emperor, and this situation got reversed because he's like, let me just remain in control and you can be emperor. It's like, okay, already 2 birds kind of crushed. That's interesting, without any major battles.
Out, and Vrenios was able to take over most of the Balkans, forcing Nikephoros III to appoint Alexios to crush him. It was 1078, and Alexios marched west with an army between 5,000 and 10,000 troops.
Okay, so like I said, I know Alexios mainly due to his politics, but not as a military man. So I'm interested in seeing if he's like good at that. Like if he's actually good at like fighting and whatnot. He's facing an army composed of what, veterans he said, or at least he has plenty of veterans. So I'm wondering if his force is like well equipped to handle that.
Strong, 2,000 of which were Seljuk cavalry, 2,000 Khometeni, or elite infantrymen, a few hundred Frankish knights, and a newly raised regiment of Athanati, or Immortals, with the remainder made up of newly raised levies. The rebel army was not only more numerous, composed of 12,000 seasoned warriors, a mixture of Takhmeta, Slavic, Pecheneg and Frankish mercenaries, but was also led by a more experienced commander. Alexios made camp on a shore of a small stream near the fortress of Calavrier, but he didn't fortify his camp as a sign of strength. He quickly sent out Seljuk scouts, learning the location and size of the enemy force, but some of the scouts got captured, and that exposed his own position. Vrienios knew that he had his opponent outnumbered, so he marched his army for the decisive battle. Alexios was on the defense, and held his left flank with his Immortals. The center was made up of Franks, while the right, under the command of Constantine Katakalon, was made up of the Khometeni and Seljuks. The Turks made up an extreme right wing, ready to counteract the enemy Pechenegs, with another smaller detachment on the far left, positioned within a hollow, concealed from the enemy.
Okay, so I was about to comment that these two forces hidden in the forest kind of caught my interest off the bat, because the main force of this pretender is exposed. Granted, he has some hidden forces here, at least on his left, but, you know, but Alexios has it on his right to counter that, but he also, on his left, Alexios, has this hidden contingent, which seemed like, I think they might come into play, because I know Alexios ends up Emperor. Obviously, I don't know how he gets there, especially in this mess, but something would tell me that he would have to overcome this challenge. I'm not sure if it's going to be through this battle or whatnot, but something has to happen to this guy. At least I know that with hindsight. I'm trying to put the pieces together in my brain right now. But, I'm assuming this hidden contingent might just jump on the flank of the pretender's right and then proceed to cause chaos. We'll see, man. I don't know. Like, Alexios is fighting an uphill battle in all senses, but he is a cunning man, so we'll see if this trick up his sleeve might work.
Vrienios had deployed his army in 3 divisions, each in 2 lines, with Pecheneg cavalry to his far left. The right wing consisted of a 5,000-strong unit, bolstered by Frankish knights and Thessalian cavalry under his brother John. His left was made up of 4,000 troops from Thrace and Macedonia, while he led the 4,000-strong center.
I have to say, I just noticed due to the image, the troop unit image, but the enemy army is all cavalry. Alexios has, like, infantry at least, if we're going by these codes, so, that's interesting.
As the rebels approached, the ace Alexios hid was sprung, and the powerful wing under John was caught between the Immortals, led by Alexios, and those lying in ambush, who were now rushing towards the battle with war cries. The rebels panicked, but after cutting down one of his enemies, Vrienios rallied his men, halting their rout and urging them back into the fray.
Okay, dang. Okay, it seemed like his gambit almost worked there, but he managed to rally the troops from a rout. So now it's like, I'm like wondering if it's gonna have to fall on these guys. If they're gonna even do anything, these hitting contingents. If they don't do anything, that would suck, then it would just have to be who's the better fighters in the center. But assuming that these guys get involved and they play a pivotal role in who wins, that would make me think, who attacks first? Like if, for instance, the Byzantine hidden unit right here attacks, they could get jumped by this. from the enemy, but if the enemy attacks first, then these guys could go. So I think that would, if these units do play a part in who wins, I think it's who strikes first. If not, then we'll just see in the center. I don't know. Anything could happen, I guess.
Despite his best efforts, Alexios, who was in the midst of the battle slashing with his sword, saw his men break and flee as they were chased and cut down. Meanwhile, on the right, the Pechenegs managed to evade the Seljuk riders and overwhelmed the right wing. In the center, Nikephoros persuaded the Franks to desert the loyalists as they swore fealty to him in the middle of the battle.
Oh my gosh, the Romans, man. I'm telling you, every time they deploy outside forces, they seem just to turn on them.
All seemed lost, so Alexios gathered 6 of his companions and charged into the enemy line, hoping to kill the usurper and end the war. It was aided by the sudden decision of the Pecheneg riders to turn back and rush toward the camp of their allies. They took as much loot as they could,
Holy crap.
while the camp followers ran to the safety of the rearguard. Part of Phrenios' army was celebrating, while others were running, and it was in this atmosphere of utter confusion that Alexios spotted the purple-clothed royal horse with both swords of...
Dude, the battle, like, in terms of composition is lost, but Alexios is just like, you know what, F it, I'm just gonna kill him. We'll see if that fixes anything. And this confusion... Oh my gosh, is the mad lad about to go for it? Is he about to accomplish it?
...state to its side. He immediately rushed in, killed some retainers, and rode off with it back to his camp.
Oh dang.
Once he arrived, he found the remnants of his now shattered army and began lifting their spirits, spreading the rumor that the enemy commander was dead as he rode atop his horse.
Oh wow. Okay, wow, that's smart.
At that very moment, an extra contingent of Seljuk horse archers made their way to the camp, just in time for the counterattack the loyalists were about to launch on the unsuspecting enemy.
Holy crap, the amount of just like rallying. Usually in most battles this is where armies just completely bail or like completely leave, but there have been times where it seems like where a rout is gonna just happen and then they just rebound. And Alexios, man, this guy is just so smart. See what he did? Killed a few retainers, convinced his army commanders that... Dude. He's about to rebound.
The reformed army was once again divided in 3, with 2 detachments lying in ambush, while the third, a mix of Seljuks and Immortals, planned to execute the classic but extremely difficult feigned retreat. Multiple...
Dang, holy crap, the feigned retreat, which has been so effective against the Romans. Now the Romans are gonna use it to their own advantage. So much is happening. So much is happening in this battle. This is awesome. Like, the amount of complexities and intricacies, this might be one of the most complex battles we've seen yet. Wow, so much is going on. I love that.
Small groups of nomads fired their arrows at the rebels, scattering many of them. Next, the heavy cavalry charged in. One of the riders spotted Phrenios, and according to the Alexiad, dashed at full gallop straight at Phrenius, and thrust his spear with great violence against the latter's breast. Phrenius, for his part, whipped his sword out quickly from its sheath, and before the spear could be driven home, he cut it in 2, and struck his adversary on the collarbone, and bringing down the blow with the whole power of his arm, cut away the man's whole arm, breastplate included.
Oh my goodness, holy crap. That kind of reminds me, like, I read Plutarch's, I still kind of am obsessed with, like, Pyrrhus of Epirus. I find him so interesting that, I like kind of read Plutarch's entire telling of his life, and there's one event that caught my eye when he was, I think, leaving for Italy after his Sicilian thing. He essentially cut down an enemy. The way Plutarch describes it, he brought down his sword straight upon the guy's head and cut him, like, almost in half. And that's just... Again, I know that who knows, but like the point is something like that caught my eye. And, just the violence that can be described by these historical accounts is kind of amazing. I thought, like, he was a sure goner, but he managed to survive that. But that's an awesome sight. Dude just literally cut a spear in half and then cut a dude's arm. Like, Berenios. Dang, man. He is a proven commander though, Berenios. I keep calling him the Pretender, but I mean he is. But like, yeah, like. He is still a proven commander at the end of the day. Like, this isn't his first rodeo, you know?
After a while, Alexios ordered the retreat, hoping it wouldn't turn into a rout as the veterans gave chase. Again, according to the...
But, like, he has these hidden units. Yes, he's trying to feign to retreat, and then these guys would jump on the wings and just... Wow, hopefully.
Alexiad. Forthwith, at the given signal, those in ambush rode through them like swarms of wasps from various directions, and with their loud war cries and shouts and incessant shooting, not only filled the ears of Renius's men with a terrible din, but also utterly obscured their sight by showering arrows upon them from all sides. The bold plan had worked, and before long, the rebel leader was exhausted, and despite his best efforts, the day belonged to Alexios Komnenos. Renius was blinded, but pardoned and allowed to return to Adrianople. As for the
medieval era loves their blindings. But, dude, Alexios was the underdog in that battle, facing a proven commander with experience and veterans, and through just sheer cunning, overcame such great odds. That was awesome. Like, that was probably one of my favorite battles we've ever covered on this channel's history. Like, so much happened. So many points where you think it was over, but just, no, let's keep going. Alexios, man, not only is he great in politics, but he's also now proven to be great in war. Wow.
Victorious general, he was not allowed back into the capital, and instead was sent out against a new pretender, Nikephoros Vasilakis, who rose up in Thessaloniki, attracting many of the remaining rebels. But one night attack later, this rebellion was also put down. It was now 1080, and the gold content of the Solidus fell to 33%, as the fourth Nikephoros rose up in rebellion. This time it was...
Can you guys stop? For like 1 minute, Romans, can you just stop with the rebellions and the declaring yourselves emperor for 5 minutes is all I'm asking for you to stop doing this.
Who rebelled with the aid of Suleiman. By that point, Suleiman received the title of the Sultan of Rum from the Sultan Melik Shah. In return for Suleiman's support, Melissenos opened the gates of Nicaea, which fell to the hands of the Sultanate of Rum, once again without a fight. Alexios was...
Yeah, like I said earlier, the Romans kind of created a new monster. Among them fighting themselves and other things, they essentially let Suleiman have most of Anatolia the whole time.
Ordered to deal with the man who happened to be his brother-in-law, but this time he refused. No action was taken against him, since news reached the capital that Robert Guiscard was planning to launch a massive invasion, after a monk impersonating Michael VII appealed to him to take back his throne, and Alexios was needed to stop that incursion.
Some random dude now is like, I want to be emperor, so I'm just going to pretend to be Michael. You know, you can kind of get away with stuff like that back then, I'd imagine, right? Like, nowadays we have, like, photos and, like, you know, like, phones and crap to kind of prove identities. Back then, like, I'm thinking, like, how much easier would identity theft have been? Just be like, I mean, granted, you would have to come up with, like, convincing stories and stuff, but I imagine it's much easier back then, right, than nowadays. But, another dude has shown up. Fake Michael has shown up. And Alexios now has to defeat the Norman. Yeah, at this point, all they have is the Balkans. And most of Anatolia is just gone, so... they really just have to hold on. This is what I love Byzantine era Rome. They are the ultimate underdogs. In a world where they're being jumped from the east and the west, they just have to fight the world, and I love it. Again, I do love learning about Prime Rome and like when they were whole and basically the ultimate power in the world, but Byzantine Rome is my favorite because like stuff like this is just like so much happening.
And it was right around this time that the old and childless Nikephoros III decided to break the agreement he made with Maria and appointed one of his relatives the heir, alienating the Komneni family, which joined the rebels. In April 1081, a band of German mercenaries was bribed and opened the gates of Constantinople.
So I'm guessing this is where Alexios finally takes the reign as emperor. I'm assuming this is when it's gonna happen.
To Alexios and his army, which proceeded to brutally sack the city. The Varangian Guard continued to defend the palace, but 3 days later, the Patriarch convinced the now 79-year-old emperor to abdicate. Alexios I Komnenos became the emperor.
Finally. This is awesome.
While we now tend to think of Alexios as a capable ruler, at the time of his coronation, the Sultanate of Rum was handed most of Anatolia and supported another pretender to the throne, a usurper. The Normans were about to invade. Control over Serbia and Bulgaria was nominal. The alliance of the Danubian cities was in rebellion, supported by the Pechenegs. The treasury was empty, the manpower was depleted, and the solidus fell to 10% gold content. No man alive could unify the bickering families and hold the empire together while also campaigning against this many enemies.
Yeah, look at all the complete mess that has been left in his wake, right? And he has to clean it all up. Like, that sucks.
But Alexios' mother, Anna Dalasini, was no man. Alexios' mother not only played a pivotal role in his rebellion, but was the real power behind the administration for the next 15 years,
oh, wow.
second only to her son. She arranged marriage alliances and delicately balanced the power between the most powerful people in the empire.
Heck yeah, mom's coming in clutch. Tag team, mom and son duo to help fix Rome. I did not know about this. Obviously, most of the accomplishments I've heard have just been about Alexios. I did not know about the power, or at least the contribution of his mom. That's interesting. Like I said, like, we're not used to seeing many women on this channel. Sorry, I'm checking my time codes, because I don't want to over-record for too long, but, yeah, overall, like, that's still just interesting. It's always interesting to see, you know, when women are essentially given power and, like, you know, big forces of it. Like, it's not something we're used to seeing in this channel or a lot of history, you know?
Previous approach of purging political opponents was abandoned and replaced with mercy and amnesty. Many old titles were discarded, and instead new ones were created. Nikephoros Melisinos was pardoned and made Caesar, as well as the governor of Thessaloniki. The extended Komnenos family was given important posts. Precious gifts were sent to the Pope, Doge, Holy Roman Emperor, and various Italian lords, while Alexios mustered an army to meet Robert Guiscard.
Already using diplomacy to help fix their situation and make things better. Again, the Byzantine Romans had to be much more shrewd, because old Rome used to just strong-arm things, like, okay, let's just raise armies, infinite manpower. The Romans of old had infinite manpower hacks. They could just keep raising armies and fighting until they could win. Byzantine Rome couldn't do that, so they had to be smarter, more selective in their fighting strategy, and just diplomacy. And also money, because they needed to bribe people. But, I'm telling you, they had to pull out more tricks up their sleeve in order to get things done.
You can check out the 2 videos we made covering the conflict, including the Battle of Dyrrhachium, which was as devastating as Manzikert, via the link in the description and in the top right corner. Despite numerous setbacks, Alexios and his coalition held out long enough until Guiscard died of malaria in 1085. But in order to repay the Venetian allies who made this victory possible, Alexios made considerable concessions to the Republic. The Doge was granted the new hereditary title of Protosevastos, making him the fourth in imperial seniority. The Venetians were granted gold, honors, and several churches in the empire. Shops, houses, and 3 landing stages were granted on the Golden Horn, and all Venetian traders were exempt from customs duties and sea taxes. In return, Venice was to answer when called upon and defend the Adriatic border. This caused a drastic shift and would spiral out of control as Western trade colonies drove the local merchants out of a job.
Yeah, but you know, you kind of have to do what you have to do, because the situation was a complete mess. Sacrifices must be made, right? But either way, I'm gonna end the video right here, guys, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.